The car accelerated down the coastal highway at 70 miles per hour. Isabella Lawrence's manicured fingers gripped the leather steering wheel as the ocean blurred past her window. The morning sun glinted off the metallic hood of her Mercedes. Then she saw the curve ahead. She pressed her foot gently on the brake. Nothing happened. Her heart lurched. She pressed harder. The brake pedal sank all the way to the floor with a hollow, sickening feel. The car didn't slow. No, 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 she whispered. The curve was 50 meters away. The guardrail beyond it was the only thing between her and a 300-foot drop. Her hands twisted the wheel. She downshifted, grinding the gears, trying to bleed speed through friction. The engine screamed. Then a black SUV materialized from nowhere, swerving in front of her with impossible precision. The Mercedes clipped its rear bumper, sending Isabella's car into a controlled skid. Dust exploded around her as the vehicle came to a violent stop, inches from the guardrail. For 3 seconds there was only silence. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. Her hands were shaking. Behind her, the black SUV had stopped. The driver's door opened. Adrian Cole stepped out. He moved toward her with purpose, his dark eyes locked on hers through the windshield. When he opened her door, his hand was steady. "Are you hurt?" His voice was calm, professional. Isabella's hands were still shaking as she gripped his arm and stepped out. The brakes completely failed. "I saw," Adrian said, crouching beside the front wheel, his fingers tracing the brake line. His jaw tightened. The line's been cut, deliberately. Someone had tried to kill her, not theoretically. Someone had physically cut her brake line, knowing she'd take this road at this time. "How did you?" Isabella started, but Adrian was already moving, already pulling his phone to call for a tow truck. "I was following at a distance," he explained. "Standard protocol. When I saw your speed increase unexpectedly, I knew something was wrong. I'm just glad I was close enough." She believed him. Of course she believed him. He just saved her life. And yet, standing there in the morning sun with adrenaline still flooding her veins, Isabella Lawrence felt something shift in her chest, a small voice of doubt. How had he known? How had he been positioned perfectly enough to intervene at exactly the right moment? But she pushed the thought away. That was paranoia talking. 2 hours later, Isabella sat in her penthouse office on the 42nd floor, watching the city sprawl out beneath her. The morning's incident had been contained. The brake line hadn't cut itself. Someone in her organization had tried to kill her. A knock came at her door. "Come in, Adrian." He entered with composed grace. In his hands was a tablet displaying preliminary reports. The brake line was definitely cut. Professional work. Clean. Someone who knew what they were doing. "Inside job," Isabella said flatly, "almost certainly." She leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled beneath her chin, studying him more carefully than before. Adrian met her gaze without wavering, his expression perfectly neutral. A good bodyguard would have the training to hide things. A good bodyguard would position himself exactly where he needed to be to save someone from a car crash that he had orchestrated. "Adrian, how long have you been my bodyguard?" "3 weeks. You hired me after the incident at the fundraiser, remember?" 3 weeks. Long enough to learn her routines. Long enough to set a trap and rescue her from it, cementing his position as indispensable. "And before that, where did you work?" "Private security for several high-net-worth clients. Nothing public. I specialize in confidentiality agreements." Of course he did. No trail to follow, no previous employers she could verify. "I want to thank you for saving my life this morning. Not everyone would have reacted so quickly." "It's my job," Adrian said simply. "Is it, or is it something else entirely?" Adrian's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes, a moment of uncertainty, quickly suppressed. "You can go now. I need to make some calls." After he left, Isabella reached for her phone and made a call to someone she trusted implicitly, the one person in her organization who had no reason to betray her. I need you to find out everything about my new bodyguard, she said quietly. Adrian Cole. I want his background, his contacts, his bank records, everything. And I want to know why he was positioned exactly where he needed to be to save my life this morning. As she ended the call, Isabella allowed herself a thin smile. If someone was going to play games with her, they'd better be prepared for her to play back. And Isabella Laurent had been playing this game longer than anyone else. 3 days before Isabella's car nearly plunged off the cliff, Adrian sat in a dimly lit hotel room in downtown Manhattan. Two men sat across from him, their faces etched with desperation. The first man was Thomas Westbrook, vice president of operations at Laurent Industries. The second was Marcus Chen, head of strategic development. We need to be very clear about what we're asking, Thomas said, his voice low and measured. This isn't corporate espionage. I understand, Adrian replied calmly. His hands were folded on the table in front of him, perfectly still. You want someone dead. Marcus flinched at the bluntness, but Thomas nodded slowly. Isabella Laurent, our CEO, she's destroying everything we built. Adrian had done his research. Isabella Laurent had actually increased company profits by 30%. She'd streamlined operations and positioned Laurent Industries to dominate the market. The only thing she destroyed was Thomas and Marcus's comfortable mediocrity and their access to company slush funds they'd been embezzling from for years. But Adrian didn't care about the truth. The truth didn't pay his bills. The truth didn't help his wife, Alina, stop looking at him with those eyes full of disappointment. How much? Adrian asked. 2 million. 1 million up front, 1 million when it's done. $2 million would solve everything. It would let him take Alina on the vacation she'd been dreaming about for 5 years. It would let him breathe for the first time since he'd gotten married and realized that love didn't pay for a life. I need to know why you're really doing this, Adrian said. The story about Isabella destroying the company doesn't match the financial data. Thomas and Marcus exchanged a look. There was a long moment of silence before Thomas leaned forward. There's someone else involved, someone bigger than us. His name is Victor Kane. He wants Laurent Industries. He's willing to pay us handsomely for our cooperation in removing the obstacle between him and that goal. The name hit Adrian like a punch to the gut. Victor Kane. Adrian's father had worked for Victor Kane once, 15 years ago. He'd been a construction foreman on one of Kane's development projects. When Adrian's father discovered that Kane was cutting corners on safety measures, he reported it to the authorities. 2 weeks later, his father was in a construction accident. The official report called it negligence. The real story was that Victor Kane had made sure Adrian's father would never walk again. Adrian's father had spent the last 15 years in a wheelchair, his body broken, his spirit shattered, his medical bills astronomical. Adrian's mother had died 5 years ago, unable to bear the weight of her husband's suffering. Everything they had was gone, and the man responsible was Victor Kane. I'll do it, Adrian heard himself say. But I need something in writing, encrypted, untraceable, proof that you hired me, proof of the payment, proof of Victor Kane's involvement, insurance. Marcus looked panicked, but Thomas nodded. Smart, we'll set it up. When do I start? Adrian asked. You already have, Thomas said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were Isabella's schedule, her security protocols, her daily routines, her vulnerabilities. She's looking for a new bodyguard. She posted the position 3 days ago. Your credentials are already in the system. She'll call you within the week. Adrian opened the folder and studied the photographs. Isabella Laurent stared back at him from 100 different angles, at charity galas, in board meetings, walking through the city, always composed, always in control. She was beautiful in a cold, untouchable way. Once you're hired, gain her trust, Thomas continued. Get close to her, learn her patterns, and when the moment is right, make it happen. Make it look accidental, make it clean. Adrian nodded, but his mind was somewhere else. He was thinking about his father, about the injustice that had consumed his entire adult life, about the fact that Victor Kane had walked free while his family had been destroyed. He was thinking about how the universe had just handed him not just a way to survive, but a way to make things right. He didn't know yet that the universe had also handed him a way to lose everything. 5 days later, Adrian received the call. Isabella's assistant asked if he was available for an interview. He was. The next morning, Adrian wore his best suit, tailored, expensive. He took the elevator to the 42nd floor. His target was sitting behind a desk that cost more than he made in a year, looking out at a view of the entire city. When she turned to face him, Adrian understood immediately why Victor Kane wanted her dead. It wasn't about profit margins or corporate strategy. It was about power. Isabella Laurent was the kind of woman who made other people feel small, and men like Victor Kane couldn't tolerate that. "Mr. Cole," she said, extending her hand, "thank you for coming in on such short notice." Adrian shook her hand. Her grip was firm, her skin warm. "The opportunity to work for someone of your caliber is worth making time for." She smiled, and for just a moment, Adrian felt something twist in his chest. It was guilt. This woman had done nothing to him. She didn't deserve to die, but neither did his father deserve to spend the rest of his life in agony. "Tell me about your experience," Isabella said, gesturing for him to sit. Adrian launched into a carefully rehearsed story. He talked about his work in private security, about his training, about his dedication to protecting his clients. Every word was true in the way that lies often are, factually accurate but fundamentally dishonest. He was an excellent bodyguard. He would protect Isabella from every danger except the one that truly mattered, himself. Isabella listened intently, asking sharp questions, probing for inconsistencies. Adrian answered everything perfectly. By the end of the interview, Isabella had made her decision. "You're hired," she said. "You'll start Monday. I have a feeling we're going to work very well together, Mr. Cole." Adrian stood and extended his hand again. "I won't let you down, Ms. Laurent." It was the most honest thing he'd said to her. As he left the office, Adrian pulled out his phone and sent a text to Thomas Westbrook. "She hired me. The operation is go." The response came within seconds. "Excellent. Remember, gain her trust first, make her depend on you, then eliminate her, we'll handle the rest." Adrian stared at the message, feeling the weight of it settle over him like a shroud. 24 hours ago, he could have walked away. But now the ball was in motion. Now he was committed. Now he was a man hired to kill. That night, Adrian lay in bed next to his sleeping wife and made a decision. He would take the money. He would use it to help his family. But he would also protect Isabella Laurent. He would be the best bodyguard she'd ever had. He would keep her safe from every threat, except from the threat that came from inside the walls of her own company. It was a comfortable lie, and Adrian was very good at telling himself comfortable lies. Adrian's first week as Isabella's bodyguard was a masterclass in deception. He arrived early, stayed late, anticipated her needs before she voiced them. He studied her routines with the precision of a hunter tracking prey. Everything about her life was predictable once you knew what you were looking for. But something unexpected happened. Adrian started to notice things about Isabella that didn't fit the profile he'd constructed. She wasn't cold and calculating, not entirely. There were moments when she was alone in the elevator before she realized Adrian was watching, when she let her mask slip. He saw exhaustion there. He saw the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. He saw someone who was desperately trying to hold everything together and terrified of what would happen if she failed. It made it harder, not impossible. Nothing was impossible for a man who decided to cross this line, but harder. On Friday of that first week, Adrian executed the first test. He sabotaged her car's brake system with surgical precision. The brakes would hold for the morning drive to the coffee shop. They would hold for the drive back to the office. But on the drive home that evening, when Isabella took her usual route and approached the stretch of highway along the coast, the system would fail. Adrian would be close behind her. He'd see the moment her brake lights didn't illuminate. He'd see her car begin to accelerate toward the curve, and he'd be perfectly positioned to intervene. What Adrian didn't know was that Isabella had discovered his deception before he'd even finished installing the sabotaged brake line. Her head of security, Rebecca Morris, had noticed Adrian's background check couldn't be verified. She dug deeper and found nothing, which was itself suspicious. Isabella had made a decision then. Instead of firing Adrian or going to the police, she decided to watch him, to let him think he was the hunter while she became the huntress. Because Isabella had survived in a world of cutthroat business by understanding one fundamental truth: information was power. So when Adrian's carefully engineered brake failure happened on Friday evening, Isabella was not the panicked victim he designed her to be. She was a woman in complete control, playing a role, watching him save her, and filing away every detail of his behavior for later analysis. After the brake failure, Isabella called Rebecca into her private office. "Tell me everything," she said simply. Rebecca laid out what she'd found. Adrian Cole's background was a fiction. His previous employers didn't exist. His references were fabricated. And most damning of all, Rebecca had found evidence that Thomas Westbrook and Marcus Chen had recently met with someone outside the company, someone whose profile suggested organized crime involvement. "Someone tried to kill me," Isabella said flatly. "Appears so," Rebecca confirmed. And Adrian Cole was positioned perfectly to intervene, which suggests either he's your protector or he's your assassin who's decided to play a longer game. Isabella leaned back in her chair, her mind already 3 moves ahead. "I want Adrian to think he's winning. I want him to think I don't suspect anything, but I want to know everything about him. His family, his finances, his weaknesses, everything." "Already on it," Rebecca said with a slight smile. "I anticipated you'd want exactly that." By the following Monday, Isabella knew more about Adrian Cole than Adrian knew about himself. She knew about his father's accident. She knew about his mother's death. She knew about his struggling marriage and his desperation for money. She knew he'd been hired by Thomas and Marcus, which meant she knew about Victor Kane. She also knew something else. Adrian hadn't wanted to hurt her, because if he had, he would have let her car crash on Friday. He'd had the perfect opportunity, the perfect cover story. Instead, he'd saved her. Which meant there was a war happening inside Adrian Cole between the man he'd agreed to be and the man he actually was. So when Adrian began his second phase of testing, the psychological assessments, the scenarios designed to measure her vulnerabilities, Isabella was ready. She was watching. Adrian created a fake security threat. He told Isabella that he'd intercepted intelligence suggesting a potential breach at the penthouse. She agreed to move, but not before she'd alerted Rebecca and had the entire penthouse swept for listening devices and surveillance equipment. She found 3 bugs, all of which Adrian had installed. When Adrian watched how she handled the fake threat, he thought he was learning about her vulnerabilities. What he didn't realize was that she was deliberately showing him exactly what she wanted him to see. Then came the moment that changed everything. It happened on a Wednesday, late in the evening. Isabella was alone in her office, supposedly reviewing quarterly reports. She called him in. "Adrian, I need your honest opinion about something," she said, gesturing for him to close the door behind him. He did, his expression carefully neutral. "Of course, Ms. Laurent." "I've been thinking about updating my will," Isabella said, watching his reaction closely. "The current beneficiaries are largely charitable organizations, but I'm wondering if that's the right choice. Do you think Thomas and Marcus could run this company if I were gone?" Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I think you should leave your company to whoever you trust most, not to business associates, not to people who have already betrayed you, to someone who actually cares about your well-being more than your assets. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning. Because Adrian had just revealed something crucial. He knew about the betrayal. He knew about Thomas and Marcus. And more than that, he was warning her away from them. "That's very philosophical, Adrian," Isabella said quietly, "but not very practical." "Practicality is overrated," Adrian replied. "Integrity is rarer." After he left, Isabella sat alone in her office and felt something shift in her understanding of Adrian Cole. He wasn't a simple assassin. He was a man caught between two impossible choices, and he was beginning to understand that the choice he'd made was destroying him. She decided then that she wouldn't wait passively for him to make his move. She would force the issue. She would make him choose between the man he'd agreed to be and the man he actually was. That evening, Isabella sent Adrian an anonymous message through an encrypted channel. "I know why you were hired. I know who hired you. I know about Victor Kane and your father. And I know that you saved my life on Friday when you could have let me die. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Adrian received the message at 9:30 in the evening, sitting in his car outside Isabella's penthouse. His hands went numb as he read it. Someone knew everything. He looked up at the penthouse window where Isabella was, and for the first time, Adrian understood the truth. He wasn't hunting her. He never had been. He was the one being hunted, and he'd been caught. He spent the entire night staring at the encrypted message. By morning, he had made a decision. He needed to talk to Isabella. He arrived at the penthouse at 7:15 to pick up Isabella for her morning coffee run. She was waiting for him in the lobby, dressed in a charcoal suit. When she saw him, she didn't smile. Instead, she simply said, "We need to talk, not here." They drove to a private location, an empty rooftop garden on one of Laurent Industries' subsidiary buildings. No security cameras, no listening devices, just the two of them and the weight of everything unsaid. "How long have you known?" Adrian asked, unable to meet her eyes. "Long enough," Isabella replied. "Long enough to understand that you're not actually trying to kill me, which raises an interesting question. Why did you accept the contract?" Adrian told her everything, about his father, about the accident, about his mother's death, about his own slow descent into desperation, about the moment when Thomas and Marcus had offered him $2 million. Isabella listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You're not a killer," she said finally. "You're a man who was desperate and made a terrible choice, but you've already proven that you're willing to change that choice. What happens now?" "Now you turn me over to the police, and I go to prison, and my family falls apart completely," Adrian said. "Is that what you think I should do?" Isabella asked. Adrian looked at her then. He saw intelligence in her eyes, but also something else. Calculation, yes, but also a kind of weary understanding. "No," Adrian said quietly. "I don't think you should, but I would deserve it." Isabella walked to the edge of the rooftop and stared out at the city. "Do you know why Thomas and Marcus really wanted me dead?" she asked. "It's because I discovered they'd been embezzling for years. Millions of dollars funneled into offshore accounts. I was planning to turn them over to federal prosecutors next week. They were running out of time." Adrian felt something twist in his chest. "Victor Kane," Isabella continued, "is a different problem. He's been trying to acquire Laurent Industries for 3 years. He's willing to do anything to make that happen, including orchestrating my death and then stepping in to save the company. He's a predator, Adrian, the kind who destroys everything he touches." "So what do you want from me?" Adrian asked. Isabella turned to face him. "I want you to help me destroy him. In exchange, I'll make sure that your wife won't have to worry about money ever again. And you'll become the chief security officer of Laurent Industries, with a salary that reflects the value of your expertise." Adrian stared at her, unable to process what he was hearing. It was forgiveness. It was a second chance. "Why would you do that?" he asked. "Because I need someone I can trust completely. Someone who understands desperation and has already chosen to climb back out of that darkness. Someone who knows Victor Kane's methods because they were almost used against me. And because I believe that you're a good man who made a terrible mistake, and I think you deserve the chance to prove that you can be better." Adrian felt tears burning in his eyes. "You don't know me," he said. "I know enough," Isabella replied. "I've been watching you for 2 weeks. I've seen you struggle with the assignment. I've seen you save my life when you could have let me die. I've seen the moment when your conscience overcame your desperation. That's all I need to know." They spent the next hour planning. Isabella told Adrian everything she knew about Victor Kane's operation. She explained how Thomas and Marcus connected to his larger network. She showed him the financial evidence, the communications, the proof of his crimes, and she laid out a strategy. Adrian became the chief security officer that day. In the interim, he worked with Rebecca Morris to map out Victor Kane's entire organization. They identified his associates, his money flows, his methods of operation. But there was a problem. Victor Kane was becoming nervous. Adrian wasn't responding to his check-in messages. Thomas and Marcus were growing increasingly panicked, and somewhere in the machinery of the conspiracy, things were beginning to break down. So Victor made a decision. If Adrian wasn't going to eliminate Isabella Laurent, then he would do it himself. The attack came on a Thursday evening. Adrian was driving Isabella back to her penthouse when he noticed the black sedan following them. Then another vehicle cut them off at the intersection, and men emerged with weapons clearly visible. Adrian made the decision in a fraction of a second. He slammed on the brakes and threw the car into reverse. "Stay down," he shouted to Isabella. The first volley of gunfire shattered the rear window. Adrian felt the impact of a bullet grazing his shoulder, hot, sharp pain, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He maneuvered the car with precision, using the city streets to his advantage, losing the attackers in the warren of Manhattan's lower avenues. Behind him, he could hear sirens. When they finally stopped, 5 blocks away, Adrian was breathing hard and bleeding from the shoulder. Isabella was shaking, but she was alive. They were both alive. "Thank you," she said simply, gripping his hand. "I chose wrong once," Adrian replied. "I wasn't going to do it again." The police arrived within minutes. The attackers were arrested. Over the next hours, the entire conspiracy unraveled. Thomas and Marcus, seeing their plan had failed, turned state's evidence against Victor Kane in exchange for reduced sentences. Within 72 hours, Victor Kane was arrested and charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and a dozen other federal crimes. 3 days after the arrest, Isabella announced that Adrian Cole would be assuming the role of Chief Security Officer of Laurent Industries. Adrian had infiltrated a conspiracy, uncovered the plot, and heroically protected Isabella. He was a hero. Adrian's wife, Alina, finally had the life she dreamed of. No more financial stress, no more sleepless nights. She quit her job and focused on her art, something she'd abandoned years ago. For the first time in a long time, Adrian could see her smile genuinely. He could see the woman he'd married before desperation had worn her down. And Adrian became the man he was meant to be all along. Not a killer, not a desperate, broken man willing to sacrifice his soul for survival, but someone who mattered, someone who was trusted, someone who could look in the mirror and recognize the face staring back at him. For one perfect week, everything felt right. Adrian and Isabella worked together seamlessly, integrating security protocols, identifying remaining threats. They'd won. Against impossible odds, they'd actually won. Then came the news that shattered that fragile peace. Victor Kane had been in federal custody for exactly 9 days when the prison transport was attacked. 3 armed men intercepted the convoy on a rural highway upstate. The guards never stood a chance. In less than 5 minutes, Victor Kane was gone. The manhunt that followed was massive, but 3 days passed with no sign of him, then a week, then 2 weeks. And Adrian knew with absolute certainty that Victor Kane wasn't running. He was planning. The message came at 11:47 in the evening. Adrian was at home with Alina, the two of them finally allowing themselves a moment of peace when his phone buzzed. An encrypted message on a channel that should have been impossible to access. Adrian's hands went numb as he read it. Adrian, you choose wrong and I'm coming for you and everyone you love so dearly, including your wife. You thought this was over. You thought you were safe. You were wrong about that too. I'm coming, Adrian. And when I get there, everything you've built, everyone you care about will burn. Adrian stared at the message, unable to breathe. He looked across the room at Alina, who was reading on the couch, completely unaware that their world had just collapsed again. Victor Kane wasn't in hiding. Victor Kane was hunting. And this time there was no escape, no second chances, no possibility of redemption. This time Victor Kane was coming, and he was bringing hell with him. If you made it this far, you understand now why Adrian had to choose Isabella over the contract. You understand why desperation can make us do terrible things and why choosing to be better, even when it costs us everything, is the only path worth taking. Drop a comment below, did you see Victor's escape coming? And make sure you're subscribed because part 2 is coming and it's going to shake everything you think you know about this story. Victor Kane escaped. He's free. And he's coming for Adrian and everyone he loves. This is about to get so much darker. Don't miss what happens next.